She found a dying horse in the jungle. What she did next was incredible. The jungle had always whispered to her, long before she had built the treehouse that towered just above the dense ferns and tangled branches, long before she had trained herself to understand the cries of animals and the language of leaves in the wind. The jungle had called her. Some would call it madness, living alone in such an unforgiving place. But for her, it was home, and the silence of civilization was a small price to pay for the music of the wild. The morning it happened was thick with humidity. The air felt heavy, as if the earth itself had exhaled a tired sigh. The woman, tall, lean, sun-kissed from endless days beneath the canopy, walked her usual path, barefoot, the soles of her feet toughened by years of barefoot wandering. A sloth hung motionless in the branches above. Parrots chattered. Somewhere, far off, a jaguar roared softly, announcing its presence like royalty among commoners. Then she heard it. It wasn't the sound of an animal calling out for food or territory. It was something else, quieter, more desperate. It was pain. She stopped, eyes narrowing, and listened. There it was again. A soft, broken noise, somewhere between a moan and a gasp. She turned off her usual path and followed the sound, crouching low beneath thorny shrubs and vines that reached out like fingers. Her heart quickened. The jungle rarely allowed her to save things. More often she came upon remains, bones stripped clean by ants, feathers scattered in a tail of some last stand. But this sound, it was still alive, barely. She found it in a clearing surrounded by twisted trees and strangling vines. It lay on its side, half covered in dirt and leaves, a creature so emaciated and broken that it took her a moment to realize what it was. A horse, a wild one, likely escaped or abandoned long ago, now reduced to little more than a skeleton draped in sun-scorched skin. Its eyes rolled toward her, cracked lips, pulling back from blackened gums. It didn't have the strength to rise. The vines had wound tightly around its legs and midsection, anchoring it to the ground. Its ribs jutted from its sides like jagged rocks beneath thin earth. She knelt, placing a hand gently on its neck. Its skin twitched under her touch. Alive, still fighting. She said nothing. There was no need for words in a moment like this. Instead, she set to work. It took hours to cut the vines, each one thick and stubborn as rope. Her machete was sharp, but even so she worked with care, not wanting to injure the creature further. Every few minutes she paused to check its breathing, slow and raspy. Sweat rolled down her face and arms. Insects buzzed around her, drawn by the scent of blood and desperation. But she didn't stop. By late afternoon, the horse was free, though too weak to stand. She fashioned a makeshift harness from hemp rope and carefully secured it around its chest. With all her strength, she dragged the limp animal several feet toward a shaded patch of soft moss and collapsed beside it, gasping. Her hands trembled. The horse, eyes fluttering, let out a long, low breath, as if finally surrendering to her, but freedom was not salvation. The animal was dying. Dehydration had ravaged it. She could see it in the way its tongue lolled from its mouth, in the crackling dryness of its lips. She needed water. Fast, her home was not far, just a 10-minute trek back through the trees. She ran. Branches whipped against her skin, leaving red marks that she ignored. She burst into a clearing, grabbed the largest container she could find, a rusted metal pot used for boiling roots, and filled it at the rainwater barrel she'd set up months ago. Then she ran back. She knelt beside the horse and tilted the pot slowly, letting cool water trickle into its mouth. At first, it didn't respond, too weak to drink. But then slowly, its tongue moved. It licked the water, then swallowed, the movement weak but determined. She offered more, and more still until the pot was empty, and the horse's breathing had steadied ever so slightly, but she knew this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, she stayed by the animal's side. She built a water trough from bamboo and clay, positioning it so the horse could reach it easily. She collected herbs known for their healing properties, guaco for inflammation, yerba mate for energy, and mashed them into pastes she gently rubbed onto the horse's cracked skin. She laid fresh palm leaves beneath it each night, trying to ward off the insects that would otherwise feast on it. It was not easy. The horse moaned often, its pain evident. There were moments she doubted her efforts, when the creature's breath came so shallow she feared it had finally passed, but each time it returned, clinging to life with a tenacity that reminded her of herself. On the fourth day, the horse lifted its head, just a few inches, but it was enough. She cried then, not loudly. There was no one to hear her, but silently, tears tracing down dirt-smeared cheeks as she whispered encouragement. "You're fighting," she murmured. "You're still fighting." From that moment, progress came in small victories. A few sips of water became long, eager drinks. A motionless body became one that shifted slightly to avoid the harsh sun. By the end of the first week, the horse could kneel. By the second, it stood, though shakily, legs trembling like saplings in a storm. She gave it a name then, Esperanza, the Spanish word for hope. Esperanza followed her back to the treehouse on the 15th day, walking slowly but proudly, head held a little higher with each step. She fashioned a makeshift paddock near her garden, reinforced it with bamboo poles, and filled it with soft grass she hand-cut from nearby meadows. Esperanza grazed slowly, still weak, but clearly recovering. Her coat began to shine. Her eyes, once dull and distant, now followed the woman with curiosity. Months passed. The jungle shifted around them, growing lusher with the rains. Parrots returned in greater numbers. Monkeys shouted from the treetops. And Esperanza grew strong. She began to gallop again. Short bursts of energy that sent flocks of birds scattering in all directions. The woman laughed each time she saw it, joy swelling in her chest like the summer monsoon clouds above. She had saved a life. Not just any life, a life that the jungle itself had tried to claim. There was a change in her too. She hadn't realized how lonely she'd become until Esperanza arrived. The long days of silence, once comforting, had become oppressive. But now, with the sound of hooves on soil and soft knickers at dusk, the forest felt alive in a new way. She began speaking again, not to herself, as she once had, but to the horse. Long, rambling stories, fragments of dreams, secrets she had never shared with another soul. Esperanza listened always, eyes kind, ears twitching, and in time, she understood something deeper. The jungle had not just given her a horse to save, it had given her a companion. It had tested her empathy, her will, her patience, and in passing the test, she had been gifted more than she'd ever expected. Sometimes at night, when the moon hung low and the cicadas hummed like a lullaby, she would sit with Esperanza beneath the stars and think about the day she found her, about the skeletal frame tangled in vines, about the hopelessness in those eyes, and she would marvel at how even the most broken beings, given love and time, could return from the edge. She thought, too, of all the things the world missed. People moved so fast, searching for meaning in flashing screens and city lights, never slowing down to see what stories the earth held in its quiet corners. How many would have passed by that clearing? How many would have heard that soft, dying moan and kept walking? But she hadn't. She had stopped, listened, acted, and in doing so she had rewritten fate. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast golden ribbons across the leaves, Esperanza nudged her gently as if to say thank you. The woman smiled, placing her forehead against the horse's, their breath mingling in the thick jungle air. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. The jungle, the wild, the silence, it had all brought them together. And together they would remain. Two survivors, two souls, stitched back together by the quiet miracle of compassion. It was never about taming the wild. It was about understanding that even in its fiercest moments, the world still offered chances to heal, and she had taken one, and so had Esperanza. The days after Esperanza's passing were slow and heavy. The jungle no longer moved with its usual rhythm. The wind still sang through the trees. The monkeys still howled at dusk. But for the woman, everything had taken on a different texture. Grief hung in the air like mist, soft, inescapable, and dampening everything it touched. She sat by Esperanza's grave each morning, fingers trailing the earth, whispering stories only the two of them had known. Sometimes she brought old trinkets, dried guava peels, Esperanza's last worn halter, bits of braided vines they'd once played with. These became offerings, not because she believed in spirits or gods, but because memory deserved monuments, even if they were made of bark and dirt. She didn't rush to fill the silence Esperanza had left behind. In fact, she welcomed it. In that silence, she began to listen more to herself, to the inner voice that had been buried for years beneath obligation and noise. The voice that once screamed in city alleys and sighed in train stations, that had gone quiet when she'd first disappeared into the jungle. It was returning now, timid at first, like a fawn stepping out from tall grass. "Keep going," it said. "You're not finished." So she did. The jungle had given her a story, not a fairy tale with polished endings and smiling heroes, but something far more sacred, a truth. She began to build something new, a shelter, not just for herself, but for others. She repurposed fallen trees and woven palm fronds, constructed a small stable beside the garden, and built enclosures where injured animals could recover. A hawk with a broken wing, a sloth displaced by illegal logging, a stray village dog that had wandered too far, and people began to come too. Word had spread of the woman who had saved the horse and herself in the process. First came the children, curious, wide-eyed, barefoot, sent by grandmothers and uncles who wanted to see the place of miracles. Then came the elders, carrying herbs and stories. Eventually volunteers arrived, young women and men who had heard rumors through village whispers or distant blogs, who had read journal entries scribbled on napkins in border towns, all asking, "Is it true?" She never confirmed it with words. She didn't need to. She simply showed them the grave beneath the tree and smiled. They would kneel, some crying, without knowing why. The jungle, once a fortress of solitude, had become a sanctuary. She taught them what Esperanza had taught her: patience, silence, trust. That healing doesn't happen on command, that the wild doesn't obey timelines. That real care is not just mending what is broken, but seeing what still pulses beneath the wound. She created journals from banana paper and dyed them with crushed berries. They filled them with sketches of plants, animal tracks, moon cycles. She set up hammocks for nighttime reflection, hung bells from branches, encouraged the young ones to write poems, to tell stories, to cry when they needed and laugh when it came. She didn't become famous. That was never the point. But she became something better, necessary. In time, she adopted a young foal abandoned near the river. He was scared, thin, and aggressive. He kicked at her and bit the edge of her basket, but she didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye and saw it. Not Esperanza, not a replacement, but another spark, another life worth betting on. She named him Sombra, Shadow, and he followed her, not out of fear or hunger, but choice. Sombra grew strong under her care. Unlike Esperanza, he had never known kindness before. He had no memory of gentleness, no blueprint of trust. But somehow he learned it. Maybe it was the way she'd never raised her voice. Maybe it was how she sat near him each night, not asking for anything. Maybe animals know when someone has buried a part of their soul with another. Years passed. The woman aged, her hair streaked with gray, her hands calloused from 1,000 small kindnesses. But her back remained straight, and her heart stayed open. Children who had once visited her with slingshots and bug jars returned as teenagers with cameras and sketch pads. Some stayed, others left, and carried her story with them like a charm stitched into their sleeves. No one remembered her name anymore. They called her La Madre del Monte, the mother of the forest. She didn't mind. Names were only shells. What mattered was the seed they protected. One afternoon, a girl approached her after planting new aloe near the shelter. She was young, maybe 10, with large eyes and a nervous voice. She clutched a wrinkled piece of paper in her palm. "I drew this," she said, offering it. It was a picture. A woman standing beside a horse, both surrounded by trees and stars. The horse had wings. The woman looked at it for a long time, then met the girl's eyes, Do you think horses can fly? She asked. The girl hesitated, then nodded. Yours did. She folded the paper gently and placed it near Esperanza's grave that night. A tribute, a prophecy, a reminder. Not everything that leaves us is lost. Some things return with feathers, and so in that jungle forgotten by maps, but remembered by miracles, a woman continued her quiet work. Not because she needed to, but because love, once truly felt, never runs dry. It echoes, it grows, it finds another broken thing and begins again. She still talks to Esperanza sometimes. Not aloud, not in words, but in the way she moves, in how she pours water for Sombra, how she teaches a child to bandage a wound, how she sits still beneath the banyan tree during the last light of dusk. And maybe that's how legends are born, not with thunder, but with whispers, with hoofbeats in the dirt, with vines untangled by tied hands, with a woman who saw a dying horse and said, "Not yet," and meant it,